There's a lightness to the show that there wasn't in 24. There's a lightness to the character.
Jack Bauer smiled once in 8 seasons, and that's when he killed Nina Myers. I mean, that's so wrong.
How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. How are you?
Good. Last time we talked was about your record.
Yes.
It was about Bloor Street.
Yeah.
Are you still writing? Are you still playing?
Yeah, I was just kind of going through. I've got well over an album that I've written, and it's just now finding the time and where to go and start recording some stuff. But before that, we're gonna try and finally do this touring thing properly. It's been so difficult with COVID. The last tour we had was in Europe, and I ended up getting COVID, and so we didn't get to finish that. So I'm going back out in July to make up for that, starting in the Czech Republic and going kind of west all the way to the UK. And that'll be July, and then hopefully the US and Canada in August and September.
Can you write still when you're shooting a show like this? Do you get some time?
I can write when I'm shooting a show. I can't write when I'm on the road touring.
Oh.
It's so weird. I think just because I'm so concerned about the set and I'm so focused on kind of that, and because it's all the same thing, that even jamming with other people in my band, it never actually comes out to be songs. But Bloor Street was written while I was shooting Designated Survivor, and Bloor Street was written literally crossing a traffic light at Bloor Street and Yonge. And I was like, oh my God, I pointed to the southeast corner to a friend of mine, and it used to, back in the day when I was growing up, it was a Harvey's hamburger place.
Yeah.
And I had been with a friend of mine that night, and I think we were trying to buy some pot, and it didn't go very well, and we got beat up. And I remember going to that Harvey's and getting ice for my eye.
Wow.
and so I started laughing about just kind of all the stories that I had as a young person on these four corners. And so Bloor Street was written, and that whole album was written doing Designated Survivor. So oddly enough, long answer to your question is that it's very easy for me to write when I'm doing a television show, and somehow impossible to write when I'm actually touring with other musicians.
I want to ask you about whether there's any intersection between what the show is about and what you end up writing songs about. But I realize that at this part of the conversation, I'm thinking about people listening to the CBC who don't yet know what the show is about.
Right.
So can you talk to me a little bit about your character and a little bit about...
I play a character named John Weir, and he lives in the world of corporate espionage, which is not a world that I knew very much about, if anything at all. But it actually exists, and it's really competitive, and it's really dangerous. And he's very good at his job. And so at the very beginning of the show, he's running an operation on a company for a client. And he's very much the hunter in that scenario. And then literally, moments in, the tables are turned, and he goes from being the hunter to the hunted, and someone starts running an operation on him, and he's desperately trying to figure out who and why. And that's really what the series is about, is him literally running for his life and trying to find out who's trying to kill him, and why they're trying to kill him. And the backdrop of this story, the thing that I've always found kind of really interesting, is that you don't know who's telling the truth. We live in a society now where finding the truth and understanding what is actually the truth is getting harder and harder and harder, because news and information is being catered to what people want to hear and what they want to see. And that plays a huge factor in our show. And so even to the degree that you don't know if my character is a good guy or a bad guy. And if he's telling the truth or if he's lying. And so it requires a kind of a level of attention from an audience person that I think is interesting and involving. It certainly was for me as an actor to play that character. And I'm really excited about it, and finally glad to have people be able to watch it.
Do you need to know as an actor whether he's a good guy or a bad guy?
It helps.
You know what I mean, though,
Yeah.
like I've never acted. I don't have any acting in me. I've heard people say that, like, I mean, I've heard people say that like when you play a bad guy, you need to believe that he's the good guy. You need to be able to understand their motivations. You need to know why this. You can't just play a villain as a villain.
Things,
so like, so when you play someone like I have to tell you, I've watched the first episode, and I started out the first episode going like, well, here's my hero. This is excellent, and then I ended the first episode going like, I don't know if I should be rooting for this guy.
Yeah.
Is that as an actor, do you need to know that?
Well, again, it helps. Like anything that you have to aim for, right? So if I know he's a good guy and I want to play against the fact that he's a good guy, I have that opportunity because I know where I'm going to land. But the nature of television just simply doesn't work like that. And I learned that on 24. When we were making 24, me and Howard Gordon would sit down at a bar, have a couple beers, and he would lay out, this is what the season's going to be, and we're going to start here, and this is going to be the conflict, and that conflict's going to be resolved at the end of episode 12, and then this other conflict will surface, and it'll be dealt with by episode 16, and then we'll end here at episode 24. It never happened, ever. Whatever he said was going to be what we would land on at episode 24 was always what we were doing in episode 14. And he would have to make up a whole nother storyline. So you never really knew what was going to happen. And so you had to adapt to that. And so as an actor, you had to leave yourself open for change. Right? You couldn't be so committed that you paint yourself in a corner. This was no different experience. And I think John and Glenn, the creators of the show, and just extraordinary writers. I mean, they wrote, one of their screenplays was Bad Santa. It was one of my favorite films of all time. And they're great filmmakers as well. They directed Crazy Stupid Love, which is, if I'm ever in a bad mood and I can throw that movie on, I'll be fine. I think they enjoyed kind of not letting me completely know where it was going.
Well, that also makes sense because there's a lightness to the show. I don't want to say it's not a comedy or anything like that, but
it has moments.
There were moments.
It's the funniest I've ever been.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, there's a lightness to the show that there wasn't in 24. There's a lightness to the character.
Jack Bauer smiled once in 8 seasons, and that's when he killed Nina Myers. I mean, that's so wrong. And it's really interesting because, I mean, I'll be brutally frank. No one's been knocking down my door trying to get me to do a comedy, right? So I was really thrilled and kind of nervous about the opportunity, and their humor is so delicate, right? It's really easy to make a mess of. And then I had the great pleasure of working with Maida Golding, who I think has such beautiful comedic timing. That she kind of held my hand through it.
What's hard about it? What do you? I mean, you've acted for what? 40 years
if
now.
If you read something on the page and it makes you laugh, your tendency is to lean into it, and I think really good comedy, you can't. I think you need to kind of let it be, and you can't be too heavy-handed with it. And I think it's kind of an oxymoron because it fights every natural instinct that you have, right? Which is to kind of go for it. Whereas it's much more like a souffle, and you can't bang the oven door, and you just got to be delicate with it. And she helped me with that, and they both helped me with that as a director.
I find it interesting that you say no one's ever been banging down your door to do a comedy, because I was going to ask you about that. It feels like there has the characters you play, whether it be in this show or in Designated Survivor or in 24, are always up against something. They're all. Is that something that's attracted to you? Like, I've never seen you play like a fun Tim Allen sitcom dad.
No.
But you know what I mean? Like, is that attractive to you?
And partially because no one's asked me to. And then I might decide that it's not something I want to do. But no one's really ever asked me, so it's not something I've been confronted with. I do like characters that are kind of facing insurmountable odds. There's something really interesting about playing someone who can't win. And I think on some level, I think we all feel like that as human beings, right? That just, there's no winning, right? We're just kind of getting through life.
You feel like you like playing characters who are facing sort of insurmountable odds. They can't end up winning. There's always something up against them, because that's sort of the, not to get too real here, but that's sort of the condition of life. There is no winning. There is no.
It's just, it's tough, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, then you learn everything and then you die.
Yeah.
Right? It's so, I didn't mean to make this kind of so depressing, but
Come on, it's the CBC, buddy. That's where else are you going to do?
There is something kind of very identifiable to those characters, and they still do what is needed, right? I had huge respect for the character of Jack Bauer, because even in those insurmountable odds, even knowing that he was going to have to make decisions that were not decisions that someone would have to make, that you're going to sacrifice these 5 people to justify saving these 5 people. He still, as a character, he still did what he felt he had to do the best thing out of that situation. And I think there's something very human and identifiable with that kind of a character. This character, John Weir, has a much greater sense of humor. I think he's more complex as a person, and I think probably enjoys life a lot more than maybe Jack Bauer. And so, but he's still prepared to take on the unwinnable task of something, because there is a moral center to him as well.
Has working on the show made you change your relationship with your phone, with your news habits?
Well, it's funny, because I don't have a relationship with my phone.
You're not one of those phone people?
No, and I don't have a computer, and I don't have email.
You're kidding me.
I still write my letters with a pen. So
why?
I just do. I'm probably the last person that still gets a screenplay on paper. It's just the way that I've always worked. And the truth is, I write my notes on a script, and I write them the way I do, and I don't have a tablet, and every time I've ever tried to get a tablet and get it to work, it doesn't. And so I've just, I'm not a proud Luddite. It's not a thing. It's just, I have a job that just has not required me to do that. Now, having said that, I have said to a friend or two in the last 10 years, hey, you want to go grab some dinner? And they're like, oh, no, I've got like 100 emails I've got to answer and stuff like that. And that's when I go, I'm pretty happy I don't have email.
I was going to say, it seems like a much happier life to not have those kind of things,
I seem to be happier than my other friends who have computers and are slaves to their email accounts, yeah.
Kiefer, you understand that this is interesting to me, that I've never met, I don't know if I've met anybody who doesn't have email or phones. Or...
I don't. I've got a phone. I mean, and
you can make phone calls on it.
Yes, and I use it as that. I remember someone was like trying to take a picture, and they were like, God, this camera won't work. And I was like, yeah, because it's a phone. And so, yeah, I use it as a phone.
It must have been an incredible learning curve then, coming into this show, like learning about the various types of technology.
Oh, I can fake it all.
Oh, I know. You know.
Jack Bauer was at the height, when we were doing 24, every possible gadget that was available, and even before they were available, Jack Bauer was using.
And you were going home and using a loom when you weren't?
Yes, I was making. Then I went home and made my blanket.
You were going home and churning butter when you were.
Very funny. No, but I mean, I do remember directors coming up to me and go, "No one types that fast. Slow it down." Because I was like. Because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just banging away on the keys.
No, what I meant was that when you are immersed in this era of this world of technological disinformation and distrust, it must only further reinforce your decision, even if it wasn't a decision, to sort of opt out of the whole thing.
There's a great story, Richard Nixon and his wife were watching the news, and Walter Cronkite did a commentary piece where he said the Vietnam War was unwinnable. And she stood up and said, it's over. And he said, why? And she said, Walter Cronkite said, it's over. The Vietnam War is now over. We were getting our news and our information from one person, and and it was fact-based, and whether we liked it or didn't like it, depending on the story, we accepted it.
Yeah.
And I think society functioned well as a result of that. I think now, when, and I certainly have my news stations that I like because they're going to kind of pivot to the angle that I want to hear. But I will, every once in a while, I'll turn on Fox News because I need to see what they're saying and how they're positioning it. And I shouldn't have to, right? And I shouldn't have to, whether it's left or right. The news should be the news, and facts should be that. And we as a society need to understand that and the truth. And just like science and just like math, 2 + 2 is 4.
Yeah.
We should not have a philosophical debate on why it's not 5.
Yeah.
It's just not. And I watch my children, I watch my grandchildren, and I watch them struggling with this in a way that I certainly didn't have to struggle when I was growing up, because I knew what was what. I knew when it was daytime, I knew when it was nighttime. I knew my times tables, and they were what they were. And so, yeah, I feel the angst and frustration of my younger family members in trying to kind of just have certain things be settled. Yeah, so the show is interesting to me from that point of view.
Yeah.
As someone who just wants to hear the truth. I don't need to be at the forefront of technology. I just need to be someone who wants to, see the truth for what it is. And it was very interesting to do a show which challenges that.
I am kind of jealous of you.
Cheers, good.
To be honest, I'm kind of jealous. I'm kind of sitting here going, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can just put the phone away.
Well, I'll tell you something, it's kind of nice to go buy stationery.
Yeah.
And get a nice pen set and do that kind of stuff, right? And you feel like I'll wear a suit to go to that shop and I'll feel kind of sophisticated.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm going to think about it. Last time you were here, we talked a little bit about your grandfather and about your dad. And I had this realization, I'm happy you brought up your kids and your grandkids, because I had this realization that you've sort of spent a lot of your career talking about legacy as landing on you, like the legacy of having your father and the legacy of having your grandfather, Donald Sutherland and Tommy Douglas, I should mention, and your mother, and these things sort of weighing on you as your own time up. But now that you're, I think about your daughter now, who I would know from Veep, who, and who has her own sort of incredible career, and your own kids and grandkids. It's a big question. But learning what you did about like the honors and stresses of a legacy, do you talk to them at all about that? It's
so funny. No.
About like what they take in.
No, it's a great question, and the answer is no, and no one ever talked to me about it either.
Right.
Like of all the times that I've spent with my father and my mom, we never talked about work. And I've done a film with my dad, and I've done a play with my mom, and we still didn't talk about work, right? And I think the only hint my dad ever gave me, it was, don't let him catch you lying. And of course, I didn't know what that meant at 15. But what it did mean is if you're doing a scene and it says, and the character starts to cry and is overcome with grief, if you don't feel that, don't do it. Figure out another way to play it. And of course, I didn't learn that until I didn't feel it one day and I faked it. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's awful. Yeah. So it was a really valuable lesson, but it was kind of thrown at me in kind of such an offhanded way, right? There was never any real discussion about, not even why do you like doing this? None of it, right? And only since you've asked the question that I realized I've never really had that conversation with my daughter either. Just kind of, I know why I love doing it, and I've just accepted that they have a reason as well.
But you've never done the, like, she needs to go to the doctor and she lives in the States, so she has to figure out, like, her insurance. You've never gone to her and been like, hey, your grandfather got rid of that in Canada?
Oh, I've done that.
Yeah.
We've certainly had that discussion.
Okay.
And, and his accomplishments are kind of more tangible.
Right.
So and I think unanimously throughout our family agreed to be just simply more important, than anything that we're doing.
It is kind of hard to celebrate anything when your grandfather created socialized medicine, isn't it?
Yeah, and when he, and all of his stuff. I mean, when he went against the War Measures Act that was invoked in 1973 because he was standing up for individuals who were being picked up in Vancouver.
Yeah.
The FLQ was a crisis that was happening in Quebec, but they used the War Measures Act to just pick up individuals in Vancouver that they wanted to arrest, right? And he was standing up and defending. I mean, the courage of that man was just extraordinary. And so, yes, everything does pale a little compared to that. But you bring up a really important thing, which is kind of the communication between parent and child. I'm gonna finish this interview and I'm gonna go call my daughter and re-examine some things. Is really, really important. And a lot of the things that we might think are just so simplistic, they need to be said.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing I just learned here.
Well, I would tell you to write her an email, but maybe you should just get a.
I'll send her a card.
Yeah, send her a card or something like that. We're out of time, but I love talking to you always.
Absolute pleasure, brother.
Thanks so much. Thanks
Cheers.
for coming in.